Hello everyone. I will share real stories that I know and I'm sure you will like them.
I never thought twice about leaving the bathroom door slightly open while I dried my hair. After all, I was home. Safe. Comfortable. The warm air from the dryer wrapped around me, drowning out the world beyond the mirror's reflection. But then I felt it. A presence. A shift in the air. The unshakable feeling that I wasn't alone. I turned off the dryer slowly, my damp hair clinging to my shoulders as silence settled in around me. And that's when I saw him. He was standing there. Too still. Too quiet. His eyes met mine through the reflection in the mirror, his expression unreadable. For a second, neither of us moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the cooling dryer in my hands, the heat still lingering against my fingertips. My pulse stuttered. "You need something?" He didn't answer immediately. My husband's best friend. Jake. He had been staying with us for the weekend, something about needing space while his apartment was being renovated. I hadn't thought much of it. He was practically family. Always around. Always easygoing. But now, in this moment, the dynamic felt different. His lips parted slightly, as if he was about to say something. But he didn't. Instead, he just stood there, his gaze flickering briefly, almost hesitating before returning to mine. I swallowed, gripping the handle of the dryer a little tighter. "Jake." A slow breath left him, his jaw tightening for just a fraction of a second. Sorry." He finally blinked, as if shaking himself out of something. "Didn't mean to interrupt." He moved, but not right away. Not before I caught the subtle flicker in his expression, the unspoken moment that lingered between us like a thread pulled too tight. And as he turned away, disappearing down the hall, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't sure if I wanted him to leave. The house was quiet again, but the silence no longer felt the same. I exhaled, setting the dryer down on the counter, pressing my palms against the cool surface, grounding myself. I needed to brush it off, tell myself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment of awkwardness. But the air still felt charged. My mind replayed it, the way his gaze had lingered a second too long, the way his posture had stiffened just slightly before he walked away. It wasn't just me imagining it. I had seen it, felt it. I ran a towel through my damp hair, moving slower than necessary, my mind too preoccupied to focus. Outside the bathroom, the hallway stretched empty, but I could still sense his presence lingering somewhere nearby. A deep breath. Steadying. It was nothing. Just my mind playing tricks on me. But as I stepped out, my bare feet meeting the cool wooden floor, I heard something that made me pause. Movement. Subtle, deliberate. Jake was still in the hall. Not gone. Waiting. I turned, my breath catching slightly as I found him leaning against the wall near the staircase, his hands tucked into the pockets of his sweatpants, his expression unreadable. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering his response. Something like that. A pause. A long, heavy silence stretched between us, the kind that wasn't entirely uncomfortable but was undeniably charged with something else. Something unspoken. I crossed my arms, hugging the towel closer to my body. "It's late." He exhaled through his nose, almost amused. "I know." My fingers tightened slightly against the towel. "Jake, you keep looking at me like that," he interrupted, his voice lower now, careful. "Like you're waiting for me to say something." I swallowed. "I don't know what you mean." His smirk was barely there, just a ghost of amusement playing on his lips. "Yeah, you do." I should have walked away. I should have said something dismissive, laughed it off, made it clear that whatever moment this was, it wasn't real. But I didn't. And neither did he. The space between us felt impossibly small, even though neither of us had moved. The hallway was dimly lit, just the soft glow from the bathroom light casting faint shadows along the walls. I could hear the distant hum of the fridge from the kitchen, the occasional creak of the house settling. Everything else was silent. Jake was still watching me. Not in a way that was obvious or intrusive, but in a way that made my skin feel too warm, my breath just a little too unsteady. I shifted on my feet, fingers tightening around the towel still wrapped around me. "This is dangerous," he finished for me, his voice low, unreadable. I swallowed. "Unnecessary." His smirk was slow, knowing. "Then why are we still here?" A beat of silence. Heavy. I should have stepped back, should have put an end to this before it went any further. But my body betrayed me, keeping me rooted to the spot, my heart hammering harder than it should have. "Jake." I tried again, but the way his name left my lips felt different this time, softer, as if I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to say. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair, something conflicted flashing across his face. "You know I wouldn't." "I know." The words left me quickly, almost too quickly, like a reassurance meant for both of us. I wasn't naive. I knew what this looked like, what it could become if we weren't careful. But knowing something and acting on it were two very different things, and right now, all I could focus on was the way the air felt thick between us, the way his presence filled the space around me. I took a breath, steadying myself. "We should go to bed." Jake studied me for a long moment, as if weighing his options, as if deciding whether or not to push further. Then, with a slow nod, he took a step back, finally creating the distance that should have been there all along. "Yeah," he murmured. "We should." I turned, walking back toward my room, my pulse still racing. I half expected him to call after me, to say something that would pull me back into that charged moment. But he didn't. Instead, I heard his footsteps retreating down the hall, the sound fading as he disappeared into his own room. I closed my door behind me, leaning against it, exhaling slowly. My head was spinning, my mind replaying every second of what had just happened. Nothing had occurred, no lines had been crossed. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, every small sound in the house suddenly amplified. The sheets felt too cold against my skin, my body too restless to relax. I rolled onto my side, hugging the pillow, but it didn't help. My mind was too full. After what felt like hours, I heard something, faint footsteps. They were soft, hesitant, barely audible over the distant hum of the house. My breath caught. He wasn't asleep either. I turned toward my door, half expecting it to open, half dreading it. But the footsteps stopped just outside. A pause. A moment stretched too thin. I could almost feel him standing there, just beyond the barrier of the wooden door, wrestling with the same thoughts I was. Then, a soft sigh, and retreating footsteps, slower this time, as if he was waiting for me to stop him. I didn't. The silence settled again, heavier than before. I rolled onto my back, staring at the ceiling, my heart still racing. I told myself to sleep, to forget the way he had looked at me, the way my skin still felt warm where he had stood too close. But the thoughts wouldn't leave. Minutes passed, then an hour. My body refused to settle, my mind refused to quiet. I reached for my phone, checking the time. 2:17 a.m. I wasn't going to sleep tonight. Throwing back the covers, I slipped out of bed, my bare feet meeting the cool wooden floor. I wasn't sure what I was doing, only that I needed air, needed space, needed something to pull me out of the thoughts that had taken over. I cracked my door open just slightly, stepping into the hallway, careful not to make a sound. But as soon as I did, I stopped. Jake's door wasn't fully shut either. The faint glow from his bedside lamp spilled into the hall, casting long shadows. He was awake. For a long moment, I just stood there, my fingers curling against the doorframe. I should have gone back to bed, forced myself to close my eyes and let sleep take over. But instead, I found myself taking a step forward. The distance between our rooms had never felt this small. I reached his doorway, pausing just outside. The sound of pages turning met my ears. He was reading. Something about that made my chest tighten. I hesitated, debating whether or not to say something, but before I could, he spoke first. "Can't sleep either?" His voice was low, knowing. Expecting me. I exhaled, shaking my head. "No." A pause. Then, soft amusement in his tone. "Yeah, me neither." He didn't invite me in, but he didn't have to. The door was already open, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to close it,